What would you do if your ex invited you to his wedding, not because he wanted peace, but because he wanted witnesses to your humiliation? Avery Monroe stood in the New Orleans rain with a cream-colored invitation trembling in her hand. Grant Whitaker, the man who once promised her forever, was marrying another woman. And beneath Avery's name were two cruel little words and guessed. They expected her to come alone. Small, broken, easy to pity. But that night, Avery walked into the most dangerous private club in the city and asked Dominic Vale, the crime boss every powerful man feared, for one impossible favor. Come with me to my ex's wedding. This is not just a story about revenge. It is about power pride in the moment a woman stops apologizing for taking up space. Like this video comment where you're watching from and stay until the end. The rain did not stop when Avery Monroe crossed the street. It followed her like a warning, slipping beneath her collar, darkening the sleeves of her cheap wool coat, turning the French Quarter into a blur of gas lamps, wet brick, and distant brass music. The St. Nocturne had no sign above its door. It did not need one. Everyone in New Orleans knew the black building on Rue Chartres with the brass handles, and the men outside who never checked IDs because they already knew who belonged and who did not. Avery did not belong. That had been the story of her life, whispered in rooms where people smiled too gently and corrected her too softly. She had not belonged at Grant Whitaker's family dinners. She had not belonged at charity galas where the women wore diamonds like family history, and the men spoke of public service while studying bank accounts. She had not belonged in the future. Grant promised her not once his father's campaign needed a better daughter-in-law than a legal assistant with a dead mother, a rented apartment, and a talent for making herself useful. But she was tired of standing outside doors. The man on the left looked down at her, then at the cream-colored invitation in her hand. "Private club," he said. His voice was not rude. Rudeness would have taken effort. He sounded like a locked gate explaining itself. Avery lifted her chin. The movement felt borrowed from a woman she had not become yet. "I'm here to see Dominic Vale." The other man looked at her then. Not fully. Just enough to decide whether she was drunk, lost, or suicidal. "Mr. Vale does not take walk-ins. I'm not walking in. I'm asking. That is worse." Avery tightened her fingers around the velvet box in her palm. Inside was her mother's pendant, small and gold, the last real thing she owned that had not been touched by Grant Whitaker's absence. "I need 5 minutes." The first man gave a quiet laugh through his nose. People who need 5 minutes from Dominic Vale usually needed better judgment 10 years ago. Avery almost turned around. It would have been easy. The rain gave her permission. So did the cold. So did the reasonable part of her brain that still understood crime bosses were not solutions. They were endings with good tailoring. Then she saw the invitation again. Avery Monroe and guest. The empty space beside her name had been printed in gold. She looked back at the door. "Tell him it's about the Whitakers." The laugh vanished. The two men exchanged a glance so small most people would have missed it. Avery did not. She had spent 2 years learning the private language of rich families. A lowered voice, a tightened mouth, a pause before the polite answer. Power rarely shouted when it could make silence do the work. The man on the right opened the door. Warmth rolled out. So did music. Not loud music, not party music. A slow trumpet. A piano in the corner somewhere. The sound of a place where money and sin had reached an agreement long ago. A woman in a black dress waited inside. Her hair was cut sharp at her chin. Her lipstick dark, her expression smooth enough to be expensive. Miss Monroe Avery's stomach dropped. They knew her name already. Yes, this way. No one touched her. That somehow made it worse. The club swallowed the noise of the street the moment the door closed. Avery followed the woman past tables where men in dark suits paused mid-sentence and women with diamond bracelets looked at Avery's wet shoes, then her face, then away as if she had been something briefly unpleasant in the weather. She had known judgment before. She had stood beside Grant at fundraisers while donors asked what she did and lost interest before she finished answering. She had watched Marjorie Whittaker smile at her dress and say, "How practical," in a tone that made Avery want to unzip herself from her own skin. But this was different. The people in the St. Nocturne did not pity her. They measured her. At the end of a narrow hallway, the hostess knocked once on a black door and opened it without waiting for an answer. "Mr. Vale." Avery stepped inside. The office was quieter than the club, but not peaceful. Nothing about Dominic Vale's world felt peaceful. It felt controlled. He sat behind a wide desk of dark wood sleeves rolled to his forearms, one hand resting beside a glass of untouched whiskey. He was younger than Avery expected, and harder than she was prepared for. Not handsome in the clean, polished way Grant had been. Dominic Vale looked as if beauty had been carved into him by something violent and left unfinished on purpose. His eyes moved over her coat, her shoes, the invitation, the velvet box. Then they returned to her face. "You are very wet," he said. Avery blinked. Of all the things she had imagined the most feared man in New Orleans might say that had not made the list. "It's raining. I own windows." Her nerves almost betrayed her with a laugh. It got caught somewhere behind her ribs. The hostess disappeared. The door closed. Avery was alone with him. Dominic leaned back in his chair. "You said the Whittakers. I said it to your door. My doors are loyal. That must be nice." His mouth did not smile, but something in his eyes shifted. A small thing. A warning that he had noticed she still had teeth beneath the fear. "What do you want, Miss Monroe?" She set the invitation on his desk. Her fingers were shaking badly enough that the paper whispered against the wood. Dominic did not reach for it at first. He looked at her instead. Avery hated that. She would have preferred curiosity, suspicion, even mockery. But his attention was complete, and she had spent too long with people who only looked at her when they wanted her to become easier for them. Finally, he picked up the invitation. His eyes moved across the names. Grant Whittaker, Blythe Caldwell. The ceremony date. The estate near Lake Pontchartrain. The line beneath Avery's name. And guest. Dominic placed the invitation down. "Grant Whittaker is getting married." "Yes." "To Judge Caldwell's daughter." "Yes." "And he invited you." Avery's throat tightened. Apparently. Why? There it was. The question she had asked herself in the grocery store aisle in the shower at her desk, while legal files blurred in front of her. Why would Grant invite the woman he had abandoned? Why would Marjorie allow it? Why print that empty space beside her name unless they wanted her to see it? Avery gave the only answer that did not humiliate her further. Because people like the Whittakers enjoy being generous when generosity costs them nothing. Dominic watched her for a long moment. "That is not the whole answer." "No, but it is the answer you can say without bleeding." Avery looked down before she could stop herself. Dominic noticed. Of course he did. She forced her eyes back up. "I want you to come with me. To the wedding." "Yes." "As what?" Avery's fingers tightened around the velvet box. "As my guest." The silence after that sentence felt physical. Dominic looked at the box. "Payment collateral." "Open it." Avery hesitated. His eyes sharpened. She opened the velvet box. The pendant sat inside on worn blue silk, a small oval of gold with a tiny moonstone at the center. Her mother had worn it in every photograph Avery had left. In the hospital, on a beach in Biloxi, at Avery's kindergarten graduation when she had been too sick to stand long but had smiled anyway. Dominic's expression changed almost imperceptibly. Who did it belong to? My mother. Dead. Avery swallowed. Yes. How long? 10 years. And you brought me this. I needed something valuable. Dominic closed the box with one finger and pushed it back toward her. You do not pay me with ghosts. The sentence should have been kind. It was not. His voice was too rough for kindness, but something in Avery's chest loosened anyway, and she hated him a little for making that happen. I don't have anything else. You have a name Grant already turned into a joke. Dominic stood. The room seemed to become smaller around him. No one turns a name into a joke unless the owner hands it over. Avery flinched. Dominic saw that too, and this time something like regret moved through his face so quickly she might have imagined it. I'm not here for a lecture, she said. No. You are here because you want a dangerous man beside you in a room full of cowards. Her breath caught. He walked around the desk, stopping a few feet away. He was careful not to crowd her, but even careful Dominic Vale took up space like the room owed him rent. Why me? Because they will know who you are. They already know. No, Avery said. They know the version of me they could afford to ignore. That did make him smile. Not warmly, not safely, but enough to change his face. You loved him. Avery turned her head toward the window. Rain slid down the glass in silver lines. I thought I did. That is not the same thing. I know that now. Do you? She looked back at him. I know he left me for a judge's daughter because his father needed federal friends. I know his mother sent that invitation because she wanted me to understand my place. I know if I walk in alone, they'll smile like I'm brave and talk about me before the salad course. Her voice shook harder with every word. I know I should stay home. I know I should be above this. I know revenge is supposed to be beneath me. But I also know I spent 2 years shrinking myself into a woman who would not embarrass him, and he still decided I was not enough. So, no, Mr. Vale. I do not want dignity tonight. I want one room of people to choke on their own assumptions. Dominic did not speak. The rain filled the silence. Then he held out his hand. Your phone. Avery stared at him. Why? So I can put my number in it? You could just say it. I could. Then you would type 1 digit wrong because your hands are shaking, call a dentist in Baton Rouge, and decide fate hates you. A sound escaped her. Not quite a laugh, but dangerously close. She handed him the phone. His fingers brushed hers for less than a second. It should not have mattered. It did. His hand was warm, steady, terrifyingly alive. He typed in his number and handed the phone back. The contact read Dominic Vale. Nothing else. No warning label. No mention of the fact that half the city whispered his name like a sin they could not afford to confess. You said yes, Avery asked. I said I will come with you. Her shoulders dropped before she could stop them. Dominic's eyes narrowed. But if you walk into that wedding as you are now, they will eat you alive before the first toast. The relief vanished. As I am now, you are angry, which is useful. You are hurt, which is dangerous. But you still look at the floor when truth gets too close. Avery's face burned. I didn't ask you to fix me. Good. I do not fix people. What do you do? I teach them how not to die in rooms that look polite. Avery wanted to say something sharp. Nothing came. Dominic walked back behind his desk and pressed a button. The door opened almost immediately. A tall man entered, broad-shouldered, dark-skinned, dressed in charcoal with a scar cutting through one eyebrow. His eyes moved over Avery once. Not rudely, not warmly. Carefully, Caleb Dominic said. "Take Miss Monroe home." Avery frowned. "I can take a streetcar." "You can." "Then why do I need him?" "Because by morning at least 3 people will know you were here. 1 will sell it. 1 will bury it. 1 will try to use it." Cold moved through Avery's stomach. Dominic's gaze dropped to the box in her hand. "You need a ride." Avery hated that he was probably right. She hated more that some exhausted part of her wanted to be taken care of even by a man who looked as if tenderness had been beaten out of him and replaced with strategy. "I'm not one of your employees," she said. "No," Dominic replied. "My employees listen faster." Caleb's mouth twitched. Avery lifted her chin. "You're impossible." Dominic looked almost pleased. "Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, a car will be outside your building." "For what?" "For the 13 days. I didn't give you 13 days. You walked into my club and asked me to enter a political wedding on your arm. That is not a favor. That is a campaign. I have work. Call in sick. For 13 days. Quit." The word landed like broken glass. Avery laughed once, sharp and humorless. "You think people like me can just quit jobs? I think people like you stay in places that teach you to be grateful for being overlooked." Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. The words pressed into a bruise she had learned to cover with routine. Her job at Bellamy and Price had never been cruel enough to leave visible marks. It had simply taken. Late nights, weekend files, emergency research, coffee runs no one remembered, birthdays no one noticed, praise that came only when she made someone else look brilliant. Dominic's voice lowered. "If you want to survive the Whitakers, you cannot spend the next 13 days letting smaller men remind you who they think you are." Caleb opened the door. Avery stepped into the hallway with the invitation in one hand and the velvet box in the other. Dominic's sentence followed her out like a stone in her coat pocket. The ride home was quiet. New Orleans blurred beyond the tinted window. All wet pavement, shuttered balconies, neon signs bleeding color into puddles. Tourists laughed under awnings. A trumpet wailed somewhere in the distance, lonely and sweet. The city looked different from the back seat of a black car, less familiar, less forgiving. Caleb drove without checking the rearview mirror too often. That made him more unsettling, not less. After 10 minutes, he said, "You scared him." Avery looked up. "Excuse me, Dominic." She almost laughed. "I seriously doubt that. You asked him for a role. I asked him for a favor." "No," Caleb said. "You asked him to pretend." Avery looked out the window. Rain traced lines across the glass. "He doesn't seem like a man afraid of pretending. He is not afraid of pretending. He is afraid of wanting the lie to feel true." Avery turned back toward him. Caleb's face revealed nothing. Before she could ask what he meant, the car stopped in front of her building. Avery lived above Lena's Bakery in mid-city in a narrow apartment that always smelled faintly of sugar-old wood and the bread that rose before dawn downstairs. The blue awning snapped in the wind. The upstairs window glowed because she had forgotten to turn off the kitchen light. Caleb got out and opened her door. "I can open a car door," Avery said. "I believe you." He did not move. She stepped out. At the building entrance, she turned back. "Does he do this often?" Caleb tilted his head. "Take in strange women who ask him to ruin weddings." "No." The answer should have made her feel foolish. Instead, it made her feel worse. Upstairs, Avery locked the door, then the deadbolt, then the chain. She stood there in her damp coat, breathing hard in the small quiet of her apartment. The place looked exactly as she had left it. A mug in the sink, a stack of legal folders on the kitchen table, A grocery receipt held to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a crawfish. A dying basil plant on the windowsill, stubbornly pretending there was still hope. Her phone buzzed. "Maggie, did the Murder Jazz Club eat you, or are you available for dramatic updates?" Avery stared at the message until the words blurred. Then she typed. He said yes. The reply came instantly. "I'm sorry. My phone must be haunted." "Did you say Dominic Vale said yes?" Avery sat on the arm of the sofa. "Yes." Maggie called immediately. Avery answered on the second ring. "Start talking," Maggie said, "and leave out nothing except felonies that make me legally responsible." Avery closed her eyes. "He wants 13 days. Silence. Then Maggie said, "Avery, I know. No, I do not think you do. When a normal man says he wants 13 days, he is planning a road trip or avoiding emotional intimacy. When Dominic Vale says it, that is how documentaries start. He says he has to teach me. To do what launder cash hide a body, smile at judges while lying to walk into the wedding without looking like they broke me." Maggie went quiet. That was rare. Avery could hear restaurant noise on her end plates, clinking voices moving around her, life continuing as if Avery had not just placed her future in the hands of the most dangerous man in the city. Finally, Maggie asked, "Is that what you want?" Avery looked toward the cardboard box near her bedroom door. Grant's things. The blue sweater he left after the last cold night they spent together. A campaign strategy book with his notes in the margins. A silver-framed photograph from a gala where Marjorie Whittaker had chosen Avery's dress. Because, as she said, simple is safest when you are not sure of the room. Avery had packed the box 3 months ago. She had never sent it. "I want him to regret it," she whispered. Maggie did not answer right away. Then, softly, "Of course you do." The memory came before Avery could stop it. Grant had ended their engagement at a Garden District restaurant with white tablecloths and waiters who moved like they had been trained not to disturb powerful men. He chose a table in the back. That was the first sign. Grant loved center tables. Grant loved windows. Grant loved rooms that could admire him from several angles at once. That night, he sat with his back to the wall and his hands folded beside a glass of wine he had not touched. "Avery," he had said. Her name in his mouth sounded rehearsed. She placed her napkin in her lap. "You're scaring me." He reached for her hand. His touch was careful, too careful. Like she was something fragile he had already decided to set down. "My father's campaign is entering a complicated phase." "Okay. There are expectations now. Donors. Alliances. People watching every choice we make. We." He still said "we" while removing her from the sentence. Avery stared at him. "Who is she?" Grant closed his eyes as if she had forced him into cruelty. "Blythe Caldwell." The name hit the table before the meaning did. Judge Caldwell's daughter. Federal connections. Old money. Perfect posture. The kind of woman Marjorie would call suitable. Avery laughed once. It was a small, ugly sound. An arrangement, Grant said quickly. "It is not as cold as you're making it sound. You're leaving me for a judge's daughter because your father needs campaign protection. Don't make it cheap. I don't have to. It came that way." His face flushed not with shame, but annoyance. That hurt more. "You're being emotional. I'm your fiancé. Were." He said it too fast. The table tilted. The candles became bright and strange. Grant exhaled. "I did not mean it like that." "Yes, you did." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "You are kind, Avery. You are steady. You are good. You're describing a reliable umbrella. I am trying to tell you this is not about your worth. That's funny because it feels exactly like a price tag. His jaw tightened. Then came the sentence that stayed after the rest of the night went numb. You were never built for the life I'm stepping into. Avery had not cried at the table. She had not thrown wine. She had not made the kind of scene rich people liked to call unfortunate. She paid for the wine Grant did not drink because his card declined from a security hold, and he looked embarrassed. Then she walked home in heels that cut her ankles bloody, took off the engagement ring, placed it beside the mail, and sat on the kitchen floor until the morning light came through the blinds. 2 weeks later, the invitation arrived. Cream paper, gold lettering, Avery Monroe and guest. As if the Whitakers had printed an empty chair beside her name, just to prove she would have no one to fill it. The next morning, Avery woke before her alarm. For a few seconds, she did not remember why her chest felt so tight. Then her phone lit up. Dominic Vale. Outside. She sat up. The bakery below had already come alive. Pipes groaned. A tray clattered. Someone laughed softly in Spanish. The smell of warm sugar climbed through the floorboards. Avery typed, "I said 8. The reply came immediately. "It is 8. She looked at the clock. 7:59. Another message appeared. "Now." Avery stared at the screen. Of course, she muttered. Even his punctuality is hostile. She dressed in black pants, a cream sweater, and the coat that still smelled like rain and club smoke. Before leaving, she opened the velvet box and took out her mother's pendant. For a moment, she held it in her palm. Her mother, Celia Monroe, had worn it through chemo appointments overdue, rent notices, grocery store shifts, and every bad day she had refused to call bad in front of Avery. Once, when Avery was 12 and crying because girls at school said she talked like someone's maid, Celia had sat beside her on the bathroom floor and said, "People will call you sweet when they mean easy. Don't help them." Avery had not understood then. She understood now. She fastened the pendant around her neck. The car downstairs was not the same one from the night before. This one was a black SUV with tinted windows and a driver who did not introduce himself. Caleb sat in the front passenger seat reading something on his phone. Morning, Avery said as she climbed in. "Ms. Monroe." "That's it. You wanted a song." Despite herself, she smiled. The drive downtown felt longer in daylight. New Orleans looked softer under gray morning clouds, but Avery knew better now. Last night had peeled back one layer of the city and shown her the machinery beneath. The favors, the names, the people who knew her address before she offered it. The SUV stopped outside a glass tower overlooking the Mississippi. Dominic Vale's building rose above the river like money had learned how to stand upright. Avery looked up. "He lives here." Caleb opened the door. "Sometimes." "What does that mean?" "It means he owns places he does not sleep in." "That sounds lonely." Caleb looked at her then. Really looked. "It is." Inside the lobby smelled like stone, flowers, and wealth. A doorman greeted Caleb by name and did not ask Avery anything. They took a private elevator that required a key card, then a code, then Caleb's thumb against a scanner. The numbers climbed. 31. 32. 33. The elevator opened directly into Dominic's penthouse. For a moment, Avery forgot to move. The place was enormous in a way that felt almost rude. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the Mississippi in gray light. The furniture was black, low, and severe. The walls held abstract paintings that looked like storms trapped under glass. No family photos, no clutter. No shoes by the door. Nothing that suggested a person lived there instead of occupying it like territory. A woman waited near the entry. She was in her 60s with silver hair pinned at the back of her head, a black dress, and the posture of someone who had never once apologized for existing. "Miss Monroe," she said. "I am Mrs. Beatrice Wynne. I manage Mr. Vale's household. Avery nodded. Nice to meet you. Mrs. Wynn's eyes moved over her coat shoes pendant. Not judging. Inventorying. Mr. Vale is in the dining room. He dislikes lateness, unnecessary noise, and emotional collapse before coffee. Avery glanced at Caleb. Caleb said, She likes you. Mrs. Wynn turned without a word. Avery followed her through the penthouse, each step sounding too sharp on the polished floor. Dominic sat at the end of a long dining table reading from a tablet. He wore a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. No jacket, no tie. Somehow that made him look more dangerous, not less. A plate waited across from him. Eggs, toast, fruit cut into exact pieces. Everything in his world seemed arranged to make disorder feel like a personal failure. You're late, Dominic said without looking up. Avery stopped beside the chair. I was downstairs at 8. You were in the elevator at 8. Do you practice being impossible or is it natural? He looked up. Something flickered near his mouth. Not a smile. The threat of one. Sit. Avery sat because she was hungry and because refusing would have felt childish. Mrs. Wynn poured coffee into a white cup and placed it near Avery's hand. Avery took a sip. It was bitter enough to count as punishment. She coughed. Dominic looked back at his tablet. You will get used to it. I would rather not build character through coffee. Mrs. Wynn made a small sound near the sideboard. Avery glanced over. The older woman's face remained perfectly still, but Avery was almost certain she had laughed. Dominic set down the tablet. Tell me about Grant Whitaker. Avery's fingers tightened around the cup. What do you want to know? Everything you do not want to say. That is not invasive at all. I am not interested in what makes you comfortable, clearly. She looked down at her plate. The eggs were perfect. Of course they were. We met at work, she said. His mother hired the firm for a custody matter involving one of her donors. Grant came in to review documents. He asked me where the conference room was. I pointed. He said I had kind eyes. Dominic's expression did not change. Avery looked up. Nothing? No. That face means something. It means kind eyes is what men say when they want a woman to feel seen without doing the work of seeing her. The accuracy was so clean it made her angry. He was good to me at first. I am sure. He was. Then tell me. So she did. She told him about the first 6 months. Flowers at her desk, Sunday baigness, walks along the river where Grant spoke about public service with a shine in his eyes that made ambition seem beautiful. Then she told him how things changed slowly. Not that dress, not that joke. Do not mention your mother's cleaning jobs. Say legal assistant instead of secretary, but not in a way that sounds defensive. Laugh softer. Stand closer. Do not look bored when donors speak. Do not speak too much when donors ask questions. It happened so gradually, Avery said. At first I thought he was helping me. Then one day I realized I had become a version of myself that existed mostly to avoid embarrassing him. Dominic watched her in silence. Avery hated how easy it was to keep talking. Maybe because he did not interrupt. Maybe because his attention was not warm, but it was complete. Grant had listened like a man waiting to correct the ending. Dominic listened like a man gathering evidence. He said, I was quiet, she continued. Near the end. Too comfortable. Too predictable. Like being with me was safe, but not exciting. Dominic's jaw moved once. And you believed him. Avery gave a small laugh. Was he wrong? Yes. The answer came so quickly she looked at him. Dominic's voice stayed low. Quiet is not the same as empty. Comfortable is not the same as worthless. Predictable is what weak men call peace after they stop being grateful for it. Avery's throat tightened. She looked away first. The river shone beyond the windows, bright and careless. You do not even know me, she said. I know enough to recognize a woman who has spent years translating disrespect into compromise. The room went still around that sentence. Avery set the coffee down carefully. Is this how the 13 days are going to be? Yes. Brutal honesty over breakfast. Among other things, I might hate you by the wedding. That would make the performance more believable. Despite herself, Avery smiled. It disappeared quickly, but not before Dominic saw it. He always saw too much. After breakfast, Dominic led her through the penthouse. He showed her the guest suite, though showed was too generous a word. He opened the door and expected her to follow. The room inside was larger than her entire apartment. A king-size bed stood against a pale wall. The windows looked toward the river. There was a desk, a sitting area, a closet with polished wooden doors, and a bathroom made of marble and glass. Avery stood in the center of it, afraid to touch anything. "You will stay here," Dominic said. She turned. "No. You will need to be here daily. Daily is different from living here, not for what we are doing. I have a job and a basil plant that is mostly dead but still legally my responsibility. Mrs. Wynne can have your things brought over. My things are not being brought anywhere." Dominic studied her. Avery felt the old instinct rise. Soften. Explain. Make yourself easier. She swallowed it. I am not moving into your penthouse because you decided it was convenient. Something in his eyes changed. Approval, maybe. Brief and irritating. Fine, he said. Avery blinked. Fine. You will keep your apartment, but you will spend most of your time here. That still sounds like you winning. I usually do. She should have rolled her eyes. Instead, she looked past him at the enormous bed, the empty surfaces, the beautiful, unreachable view. This place does not feel like a home, she said. Dominic's face closed. No, he said. It does not. The honesty surprised her. Before she could answer, he turned toward the hallway. We start now. Avery followed him back into the main room. What exactly are we starting? Dominic stopped near the windows. Morning light cut across the floor between them. You came to me because you want to be seen differently. Yes. No, he said. You came to me because you want to stop seeing yourself through Grant Whitaker's eyes. Avery went quiet. Dominic stepped aside and pointed toward the far end of the room. Walk to the door. She stared at him. Walk. Yes. That is your grand plan. For the next 5 minutes, yes. Avery exhaled, annoyed, and walked across the room. When she reached the door, Dominic said again. She turned. What was wrong with that? Everything. Specific and encouraging. You lead with your head down. Your shoulders fold inward. Your steps are too small. You move like you are trying not to disturb the air. Heat rose in Avery's cheeks. I am just walking. No, Dominic said. You are apologizing for taking up space. The words struck harder than they should have. Avery looked toward the windows so he would not see her face change. But he did. Of course he did. His voice lowered. People like the Whitakers build rooms designed to make everyone else feel grateful for being allowed inside. If you enter like a guest, they will treat you like a favor. If you enter like a woman who belongs, they will wonder who gave you the key. Avery turned back toward the far end of the room. This time she lifted her chin before she walked. It felt ridiculous. It felt false. It felt like wearing someone else's bones. Dominic watched without speaking until she reached the door. Then he said, Again. Again became the shape of Avery Monroe's days. Again across the polished floor. Again with her chin lifted. Again without folding her shoulders in like she was trying to disappear between breaths. By the 3rd hour, her feet hurt. By the 4th, she hated the sound of Dominic Vale's voice. By the 5th, she hated that the sound of it still made her straighten before she could stop herself. Again he said from near the windows. Avery stopped at the far end of the room and turned slowly. The Mississippi moved behind him in a gray ribbon of light, wide and patient, as if it had watched men like Dominic rise and fall for centuries and had never cared enough to remember their names. "I understand that word has worked well for you," she said, breathing hard. "But have you considered adding others?" Dominic looked at her feet. "No. Charming. You rushed the last 3 steps. I was trying to reach the door before I died of old age. You rushed because you wanted it finished. I wanted it finished because we have been walking across your living room for 2 hours. 3. Thank you for making it worse." Mrs. Wynne passed through the hall with a silver tray and did not look their way. "It has been 3 hours and 12 minutes. Avery turned toward her. "You are counting. I am surviving," Mrs. Wynne said and kept walking. Dominic's mouth moved slightly. Avery pointed at him. Was that almost a smile? No, it was. Again. She groaned, but she walked. Something changed after that. Not all at once. Nothing in Avery changed all at once. She had spent too many years being corrected in small amounts to believe in sudden transformation. But the body listened when pride was too tired to argue. Her steps widened, her head stayed level, her eyes stopped asking the floor for mercy. Dominic did not praise her. He did not need to. The first time she reached the door and turned without looking away from him, the silence that followed felt like a hand placed carefully at the center of her back. Good, it said, even though he did not. On the 4th day, he made her stand in front of a mirror. That sounded easy until she learned there were ways to stand like defeat had already packed a bag inside your chest. Dominic stood behind her, close enough for his reflection to live beside hers, not close enough to touch. He was careful that way. He occupied the air around her without crossing the final inch, and somehow that inch became the loudest thing in the room. "Your weight is on your back foot," he said. Avery stared at her reflection. Her hair was tied too tightly. Her sweater had slipped off one shoulder. Her face looked pale in the clean morning light. "That matters?" "It tells people you are ready to retreat. I am ready to retreat." "I know. That is the problem." She shifted forward. "Too much." She shifted back. "Now you are asking permission again." Avery closed her eyes. "Do you ever get tired of being unbearable?" "No." "Do people like you?" "Not for long." The honesty made her open her eyes. In the mirror, Dominic's face gave nothing away. His gaze, however, was not cruel. It was sharper than kindness, less comforting, more useful. He watched her as if she were a locked room and he had decided not to break the door only to make her understand she had been holding the key the whole time. "Hands," he said. Avery looked down. Her fingers were curled into fists. She forced them open. "Not like that." "What now?" "You look like you are pretending to be relaxed for a hostage negotiator. That is oddly specific. It is also accurate." She exhaled through her nose and tried again. Dominic moved to her side. "What do you see?" Avery met her own eyes in the mirror. The question should have been simple. It was not. She saw a woman who had been invited to a wedding like a joke. She saw a woman whose boss had left 3 voice messages asking whether she planned to be dramatic much longer. She saw a woman who still had Grant Whitaker's sweater in a cardboard box because sending it back meant admitting there was no door left open. "Me," she said. Dominic's eyes narrowed. Lazy answer. Anger rose fast. "I see someone who does not know what she is doing. Better. I see someone who came to a criminal for help because she could not handle one wedding invitation." His expression hardened. "No." She laughed without humor. "No. You came because you were outnumbered." That stopped her. Dominic looked at her reflection instead of her face. There is a difference between weakness and being surrounded by people who profit when you forget your own size. Avery swallowed. The mirror blurred, but she refused to blink first. Dominic saw the tears anyway. He always saw too much. "Do not hide from yourself," he said, quieter now. "They taught you shame because shame keeps a woman obedient." Avery turned away from the mirror. "And what do you teach?" Dominic looked at her for a long moment. Cost. That word stayed with her through breakfast, through the bitter coffee she still believed was a private form of punishment, through the ride back to her apartment that night when the city smelled like rain-fried dough and exhaust. Cost. As if every version of herself had a price, and the woman she wanted to become would not be given to her for free. On the 5th day, Dominic called it conversation. Avery called it murder with better manners. They sat across from each other at the long dining table. Dominic had a notebook open in front of him. Avery had coffee she refused to drink and a headache forming behind her left eye. "People at that wedding will not insult you directly," he said. "They will dress the insult beautifully." "So rich people." "Exactly." He leaned back. Morning light touched the hard line of his face and softened none of it. "I will be Marjorie Whittaker." Avery stared. "I would pay actual money to see that." Dominic's posture changed. It was subtle, then not. His shoulders lowered. His mouth curved into a polite smile that did not reach his eyes. His voice warmed by one careful degree, and suddenly Avery felt the old cold open in her stomach. "Avery, darling," Dominic said, and somehow it was Marjorie without becoming a joke. "How brave of you to come." Avery looked down. Dominic's real voice returned at once. "Dead." She snapped her eyes up. "Excuse me, you looked down. She wins." It was 1 second. 1 second is enough for people like her. They know how to live inside a crack. Avery rubbed her forehead. Dominic became Marjorie again. "Avery, darling, how brave of you to come." Avery forced a smile. "I would not miss it. Grant and I both ended up where we belong." Dominic tilted his head, still smiling, still poisonous. "How mature of you. I worried this might be difficult." "It was," Avery said. She let the silence breathe. Then it was not. Dominic's eyes sharpened. He dropped the act. "Better." The praise landed too warmly in her chest. She reached for the coffee to hide it, then remembered she hated the coffee and set her hand back down. They practiced for hours. Dominic became Grant Marjorie, a bored donor's wife, a retired judge, a cousin with too much champagne and too little sense. Each question looked harmless until it found the soft place beneath her ribs. "Are you seeing anyone seriously? Do you still work at that little office? Was the breakup sudden? Did Grant help you choose that dress? You must be relieved not to carry the pressure of public life." At first, Avery answered too quickly, then too defensively, then too honestly. Dominic stopped her every time. "Never hand them your wound," he said. "They will call it conversation and press their thumb into it." Avery leaned back exhausted. "You make people sound awful. They often are. That is bleak. That is useful." She studied him across the table. "Who taught you that?" For the first time all morning, Dominic did not answer immediately. His fingers tapped once against the notebook. "My father." The air changed. Avery waited. Dominic's gaze moved toward the river. He had a gift for finding weakness. Enemies, friends, children. It did not matter. Her voice softened despite herself. "Dominic." He looked back at her, and the door closed. "Again," he said. So they continued. By the 7th day, Avery could answer Marjorie Whittaker without blinking. She could turn Grant's concern into embarrassment. She could smile at a veiled insult and return it polished enough to be mistaken for grace. Dominic was not satisfied. He never was. That afternoon, Elena Hart arrived with garment bags, 2 assistants, and the brisk calm of a woman who could identify insecurity by fabric choice. Avery stood in the guest room while dresses were lifted from black covers one by one. Black, Dominic said. Too severe. Red, too obvious. Pale champagne. Avery said, absolutely not. Elena lifted one brow. You have opinions? I have eyes. From the doorway, Dominic said, good. Avery turned. Are you supervising my wardrobe now? I am supervising the entire operation. Of course you are. Then Elena brought out the emerald gown. The room seemed to quiet around it. The dress did not beg for attention. It assumed attention had already been offered and accepted. The fabric held the light softly. The neckline was simple. The shape was clean. It looked like something a woman wore when she no longer needed to prove she belonged because everyone else had started wondering who invited her. Avery touched the sleeve. This one, she said. Elena studied her. It requires posture. I have been terrorized into posture for a week. Dominic's mouth almost betrayed him again. Try it on, Elena said. When Avery stepped out, no one gasped. Real life rarely gave gifts that obvious. Instead, Elena stopped adjusting a garment bag. Mrs. Wynne paused in the doorway. Caleb, who had appeared without sound, looked at Avery once and then looked away with the caution of a man who knew when beauty had become dangerous. Dominic went very still. That was worse than a gasp. Avery looked down at herself. Is it too much? Dominic's voice came low. No. She looked at him. Just no. No correction. No sharp edge. No lesson. Heat rose in her face. Elena began pinning the fabric for tailoring, murmuring to her assistant, but Avery barely heard her. Dominic's gaze was not possessive, not exactly. It was focused as if he had imagined this version of her before she had known it existed. Later, after Elena left, Avery stood alone in the guest room wearing her own clothes again. The emerald dress hung from the closet door like a dare. Her phone buzzed. Maggie. Proof of life, please. Avery called her. Maggie answered before the first ring finished. Tell me you still have all your organs. I tried on a dress. Unless the dress was made of evidence that does not answer my concern. It was emerald. A pause. Oh no. What you said, emerald like a woman in a romance novel right before she ruins her own peace. Avery sat on the edge of the bed. I am not ruining anything. That is usually how the ruining begins. The concern beneath Maggie's sarcasm made Avery's chest ache. He is not what I expected, Avery said. Dangerous men never are. That is how they get close enough. He listens. Predators listen too. He has not hurt me. Not all hurt starts loud. The room went quiet. Avery knew Maggie was not trying to be cruel. She was standing outside the fire and naming the flames. I know, Avery said. Do you? Avery did not answer. After the call ended, she found Dominic on the balcony. New Orleans stretched below him in blue evening light. The river moved dark and wide. Somewhere far below, a siren cried once and disappeared into the city. Dominic stood with his sleeves rolled up, one hand resting on the iron rail. For the first time, Avery saw the scar near his ribs, pale and jagged, disappearing beneath the edge of his shirt. She should have turned away. Instead, she stepped outside. Dominic did not look at her. You move quietly when you are trying not to be noticed. I thought I was getting better. You are. Then why did you notice? That is how I knew. She joined him at the rail, leaving space between them. The air smelled like river water heat and distant rain. "Who gave you that scar?" she asked. Most people would have told her it was none of her business. Dominic did not waste words on the obvious. "My brother." Avery's breath caught. Dominic looked out at the city. "He thought our father would choose him if I was dead." What happened? He was wrong. The answer chilled the small space between them. Avery watched his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the shadows beneath his eyes. She had spent days being studied by him. Now she saw the cost of a man who had learned too young that love and danger could sit at the same table. "I am sorry," she said. "I am not." "Yes, you are." His gaze cut to hers. Her heart kicked once hard. "Careful," he said. "Why do you always say that when I am right? Because you do not know what being right can cost." The wind lifted a strand of hair across her cheek. Dominic reached out, then stopped before touching her. The restraint was visible. It felt intimate. Avery should have stepped back. She did not. For one long second, the city seemed to fall away beneath them. Then Dominic lowered his hand. "Tomorrow we rehearse the entrance." Avery released a breath she had not meant to hold. "Of course we do." He turned toward the door. She caught his sleeve before thinking. Dominic looked down at her hand. She let go at once. "Sorry." His eyes returned to her face. "Do not apologize unless you mean it." "I did mean it." "No," he said. "You panicked." The truth irritated her because it was the truth. She lifted her chin. "Fine. I panicked." "Better. There it is again." "What?" "That word." "Better." She folded her arms. "Do you ever say anything fully kind?" Dominic studied her in the balcony light. Then he said, "You are stronger than you think, sharper than Grant deserved, and too honest for the rooms you are about to enter." Avery went silent. Dominic opened the balcony door. "Do not look so pleased. I said fully kind. I did not say gentle." He went inside. Avery stayed outside a moment longer, smiling despite herself. The next day, the penthouse became a stage. The private elevator opened. Avery stepped out. Dominic stood near the windows. "No." Avery stopped. "I did not even finish entering." "You looked for the room to approve you." She went back. Again. Too fast. Again. Too careful. Again. You looked at the floor. Again. By the time she did it right, she no longer felt like a woman walking into a room. She felt like the room had been waiting for her. Dominic watched her from across the penthouse. "Good." Avery stopped. "Not better. Good." Caleb gave a low whistle from the sofa. "Promotion." Mrs. Wynne disappeared into the kitchen, but Avery saw the smile before she turned away. Dominic ignored them both. "Now with me." Avery's pulse changed. Dominic crossed the room and offered his arm. Not his hand. His arm. Formal. Controlled. Proper. Somehow more dangerous than anything else. Avery slipped her hand around his elbow. The contact was light, but the effect was immediate. Dominic was solid beside her. Warm. Steady. Every part of him carried certainty. Standing next to him felt like standing near a storm that had chosen for the moment not to break. "Do not lean into me," he said. "I am not. You thought about it. That should not count. It counts." They walked together from the elevator toward the windows. At first, Avery matched his pace poorly. Then she rushed. Then she overcorrected. Dominic stopped. "You are trying to follow me. You are leading. No. We are arriving together." That sentence did something to her. She looked up. Dominic's expression remained unreadable, but his eyes were not cold now. Again, he said softer. So they walked again. This time Avery did not follow. She moved beside him. When they reached the windows, Dominic looked down at her hand still resting on his arm. Neither of them moved away. Caleb cleared his throat. Should I leave, or are we all pretending the air did not just catch fire? Avery pulled her hand back. Dominic looked at Caleb with a calmness that felt murderous. Caleb stood, leaving. Mrs. Wynn's voice floated from the kitchen. Take your shoes off the sofa before you die. For the first time since Avery had met him, Dominic laughed. Brief, low, almost unwilling, but real. Avery stared. Dominic looked at her. What? You laughed. I have laughed before. I doubt that. His mouth curved barely. Again. By the final evening before the wedding, Avery no longer recognized the rhythm of her own life. Her apartment had become a place she slept, not a place she returned to. Her old job had become a row of unread emails and one voicemail from her boss asking whether she planned to be dramatic much longer. Grant had become less of an open wound and more like a photograph left too long in sunlight, fading at the edges. Dominic had become the dangerous part of every day she looked forward to. That frightened her most. She stood before the full-length mirror in the guest suite wearing the emerald dress. Elena had altered it perfectly. The fabric followed her body without clinging. Her hair was pinned low. Her mother's pendant rested at her throat. The woman in the mirror looked calm. Avery knew better. A knock came at the open door. Dominic stood there in a black suit, dark tie, white shirt, his expression still a stone. Avery turned. Well, he walked in slowly. For once his eyes did not catalog flaws. They rested on her face. You are ready, he said. Avery tried to laugh. It came out thin. I do not feel ready. That does not matter. It matters to me. Dominic stopped in front of her. Close, but not touching. You think courage feels clean, he said. It does not. It feels like a shaking hand you refuse to hide. Avery looked down at her fingers. They were trembling. Dominic reached out and took one hand in his. His thumb brushed once across her knuckles. The room seemed to narrow around that touch. Tomorrow you do not look for Grant first. You do not look for Marjorie. You do not search the room to see who approves of you. Avery's voice was quiet. Who do I look at? Dominic's eyes held hers. Me. The answer should have sounded arrogant. It did not. It sounded like an offer, like shelter with teeth, like danger choosing to stand on her side. Avery swallowed. And if I forget everything you taught me, you will not. You cannot know that. I can. How? His gaze dropped briefly to the pendant at her throat, then returned to her face. Because the woman who walked into my club would have traded her last ghost to be seen for one night. The woman standing here would burn the room down before begging for a place in it. Avery's chest tightened. No one had ever spoken to her like that. Not like she was delicate. Not like she was useful. Like she was dangerous in her own right. Dominic released her hand and stepped back as if he had remembered himself too late. The car leaves at 4. Avery nodded. He reached the door, then paused. Avery. She looked at him. His voice was quieter now. Rougher. Do not let them make you miss who you used to be. Then he was gone. Avery turned back to the mirror. For a moment, she saw the old version of herself. The woman who had sat on the kitchen floor after Grant left. The woman who had opened the wedding invitation and felt her name become a joke. The woman who had walked into the St. Nocturne with rain in her hair and desperation in her hands. She did not hate that woman. That woman had brought her here. She had survived long enough for this version to stand in her place. Avery touched the pendant at her throat. Outside the windows, New Orleans glittered like a city full of secrets. Inside the room, the emerald dress weighted on her skin like armor. The invitation sat on the desk where Dominic had placed it that morning. Avery Monroe and guest. She picked it up, looked at the gold lettering, and smiled without shaking. The gold lettering stayed with Avery long after she set the invitation down. Avery Monroe and guest. For weeks, those words had looked like an insult. A blank space beside her name. A small, polished cruelty sent through the mail by people who knew how to wound without raising their voices. But on the morning of Grant Whitaker's wedding, the invitation felt different in her hand. Not harmless, never that, but no longer powerful enough to make her shake. Pale New Orleans light spilled across Dominic Vale's guest suite, turning the emerald dress on the wardrobe door into something alive. Avery stood barefoot on the cool floor wearing a silk robe Elena had left behind and her mother's pendant against her throat. The city below was already awake. Cars moved along the river road. A horn sounded somewhere near the docks. Farther away, church bells rang through the damp morning air, as if the city had decided to bless whatever sins were planned before sunset. Avery had barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the wedding estate. White flowers. Polished smiles. Grant at the altar. Marjorie Whitaker looking at her with that soft expression rich women used when they wanted to call someone unfortunate without dirtying the word. A knock came at the open door. Mrs. Wynne entered carrying coffee in one hand and a garment bag over her arm, though the dress was already hanging in plain sight. "You are awake," the older woman said. "I am not sure I ever stopped being awake." "Good. Sleep makes people soft before battle." Avery looked at her through the mirror. "Does anyone in this house believe in comfort?" Mrs. Wynne set the coffee on the vanity. Comfort is earned after surviving the day. There was no smile on her face, but Avery had learned to hear the warmth beneath the discipline. The shower was too hot, but Avery did not adjust it. Steam filled the glass and wrapped around her shoulders. She stood beneath the water until her skin turned pink, letting the heat blur the edges of her thoughts. For one moment, she let herself remember Grant's hands. The way they used to settle at her waist in public when he wanted the room to know she belonged to him. The way he had stopped touching her near the end unless someone important was watching. The way his voice softened whenever he was about to say something cruel, as if gentleness could make the wound more civilized. Avery pressed both palms against the tile. "Not today," she whispered. When she stepped out, Elena and 2 assistants were waiting in the bedroom with brushes, pins, makeup, and the focused silence of people who understood transformation as a craft. They did not ask Avery how she felt. She loved them for that. Her hair was pinned low at the nape of her neck, soft enough to move, controlled enough not to fall. Her makeup was subtle but sharper than anything she would have chosen herself. Her eyes looked wider, her mouth looked calmer. Her cheekbones looked like they belonged to a woman who had never apologized for entering a room. The dress came last. The emerald fabric slid over her skin like water made solid. Elena fastened the back, smoothed the waist, and stepped aside. Avery faced the mirror. The woman staring back at her did not look abandoned. She looked misread. There was a difference. Her mother's pendant waited on the vanity. Avery picked it up and tried to fasten the clasp, but her fingers trembled. Another knock sounded. Dominic stood in the doorway in a black suit so perfectly cut it made the room feel underdressed. His shirt was white. His tie was dark. His hair had been brushed back from his face, and his expression was unreadable until his eyes found her in the mirror. Something in him stopped. Avery felt it. She turned slowly. "Say something." Dominic entered the room. The assistants suddenly found reasons to disappear. Elena followed them with the swift intelligence of a woman who knew when a room no longer needed witnesses. Dominic stopped behind Avery and took the pendant from her hand. "Breathe," he said. "I am." "No," he said. You are preparing to run without moving." His fingers brushed the back of her neck as he fastened the clasp. Avery felt the contact through her whole body. The pendant settled at her throat, warm from her palm. Dominic's eyes met hers in the mirror. "You look like a problem." Her mouth curved. "For whom?" "For everyone who expected you to arrive as an apology." She turned to face him. For one breath they stood close enough that the air between them felt spoken for. "You will be beside me?" she asked. His face changed almost imperceptibly. Every step. The car was waiting downstairs at 4. Not the SUV from training mornings, not the sedan from the first night. This was a long black car with polished chrome and windows dark enough to turn the world into reflection. Caleb Rhodes stood near the rear door in a charcoal suit, his hands folded in front of him, his eyes moving over the street with patient violence. He saw Avery and tilted his head once. "Miss Monroe. That means I look good, right? It means Dominic is going to make poor decisions." From behind her, Dominic said, "Careful." Caleb opened the door. "Always." Avery slid into the back seat. Dominic joined her, and the door closed with a soft, expensive sound that sealed them inside a quiet smelling faintly of leather rain and his cologne. New Orleans moved past in pieces. Balconies with iron railings, brick walls painted with old advertisements, a woman carrying flowers wrapped in brown paper, a man in a delivery vest arguing with a parking meter, ordinary lives unfolding while Avery rode toward the place where hers had broken. Dominic made one phone call in a low voice. He said names Avery did not know and numbers that meant nothing to her. When he ended the call, he turned the phone face down on his knee. "Business?" she asked. "Always." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." The honesty surprised her. She looked out the window as the city softened into wider roads and cleaner lawns. The houses grew larger, the trees older. The air itself seemed to change as they neared Lake Pontchartrain, as if money had filtered it first. Avery's hands began to shake. She tucked them into her lap. Dominic noticed anyway. He reached across the seat and covered one hand with his. The gesture was quiet. No audience. No need. That made it worse and better at once. "You do not owe anyone in that house your pain," he said. Avery looked at their hands. His was larger, steady, scarred faintly across the knuckles. "What if I see him and everything comes back?" "Then let it pass through. Do not build a home for it." She looked at him. That almost sounded healthy. "I read one book once." Despite herself, Avery laughed. The sound loosened something in her chest. The Whitaker estate appeared at the end of a long private drive, all white columns, tall windows, and perfect lawns rolling toward the lake. White tents had been set near the gardens. Valets moved between luxury cars. Guests in silk linen pearls and tailored suits stood beneath the late afternoon sky holding champagne and speaking in voices designed never to carry too far. The car slowed. Avery's pulse climbed into her throat. Dominic's hand tightened once around hers. "Look at me." She did. Not down. Not around. At me. The car stopped. Outside, a valet opened Dominic's door. Dominic stepped out first. Avery watched through the window as heads began to turn. Recognition spread through the nearest guests like ink dropped in water. Dominic Vale did not need an introduction. In New Orleans, some names were not spoken loudly because the walls might have opinions. He turned and offered his hand. Avery placed hers in it. Then she stepped out of the car. Conversation thinned. It did not stop. These people were too well trained for that. But Avery felt the shift, the small break in rhythm, the pause between words, the quick glances that became longer when they reached Dominic's face than hers. The emerald dress caught the light. Her pendant rested at her throat. Her spine stayed straight because Dominic had made her walk across his living room until every muscle remembered how. Someone whispered her name. Someone else whispered his. Avery did not look toward either voice. Dominic's hand rested at the small of her back, light enough to be polite, present enough to be unmistakable. "Ready?" he asked. "No." "Good." They walked up the stone steps together. Avery did not follow him. She arrived with him. At the entrance, Marjorie Whittaker waited in pale blue silk and pearls that looked inherited from women who had never carried their own bags. Her smile was perfect. Avery had once mistaken that smile for approval. Never again. "Avery Marjorie," said, extending both hands as if greeting a beloved daughter. "What a lovely surprise." Avery let Marjorie take her hands for exactly 1 second. "You invited me." A flicker. Small, but there. "So we did," Marjorie said. "I simply was not certain you would feel comfortable attending. I appreciate your concern." Dominic's hand remained at her back. Marjorie's gaze moved to him. "And you have brought a guest." Avery smiled. "Dominic Vale." "Dominic, this is Marjorie Whittaker." Dominic offered his hand. Marjorie had no choice but to take it. "Mrs. Whittaker." "Mr. Vale." Her smile tightened by a thread. "I believe I know your name." "Most people who need to do." The sentence landed gently. That made it more dangerous. Marjorie withdrew her hand. "I was not aware you and Avery were acquainted." "There are many things you are not aware of," Dominic said. Avery felt the air shift again. Marjorie's eyes returned to Avery. For the first time in 2 years, she seemed to really look at her. Not through her. At her. "The ceremony will begin soon," Marjorie said. "I hope you both enjoy the afternoon." "We intend to," Avery said. When Marjorie walked away, Avery exhaled. Dominic leaned closer. "Very good. Do not sound so surprised." "I am not." She looked up at him. His mouth barely moved. "I am pleased." That was worse than praise. They entered the ceremony space where white chairs had been arranged beneath a canopy of flowers. The lake glittered beyond the lawn, blue and indifferent. A string quartet played something soft enough to be expensive. Guests watched Avery and Dominic from behind champagne glasses and polite smiles. Caleb appeared near the back of the ceremony space, somehow already inside. Avery had stopped asking how he moved like that. Dominic guided her to seats near the aisle, visible but not desperate. "Strategic," she murmured, "visible without begging, romantic, accurate." She sat smoothing the dress over her knees. Her heart was beating hard, but not wildly now. The first blow had landed and she was still standing. The music changed. The wedding party began. Bridesmaids in pale gold walked down the aisle with practiced smiles. Men in dark suits followed, each one more polished than memorable. Then Grant appeared at the altar. Avery had imagined this moment so many times that seeing him in real life felt strangely small. He looked the same. Blonde hair, carefully styled, navy suit, clean jaw, handsome in the way that made donors trust him and waiters forgive him. His smile was ready before he even needed it. For a moment, pain rose. Not sharp, not fresh. More like touching a scar and remembering the wound. Dominic's hand found hers on the chair between them. He did not look at her. He simply laced their fingers together. Avery breathed. Grant looked across the guests. His gaze passed over faces, paused, moved on, then snapped back. He saw her, then Dominic. The smile on his face faltered. Only for half a second. Avery would have missed it once. She did not miss it now. The old part of her waited for satisfaction. It did not come. Instead, she felt distance. Clean, strange distance like Grant Whitaker was a man she had once read about in a book she no longer owned. The bride appeared. Blythe Caldwell moved down the aisle on her father's arm, radiant and controlled. Her dress was flawless. Her smile was flawless. Her posture was flawless. Nothing about her looked free. Avery watched her and felt the anger she had carried for months loosen in an unexpected place. Blythe was not the villain. Maybe she was not even the winner. Maybe she was another woman dressed beautifully for a bargain everyone else had made. Grant took Blythe's hand. The ceremony began. Words about love drifted through the air, polished and hollow. Partnership, devotion, choosing one another. Avery listened and wondered how many people in the audience believed them and how many simply appreciated a well-performed lie. When vows were spoken, Grant's voice was steady. Avery remembered that voice promising her a small house one day, Sunday pancakes, children, a dog if his mother could be convinced. His promises had always sounded beautiful. She knew now that beauty and truth did not always enter the same room. Dominic leaned slightly closer. "You are quiet," he murmured. "I am watching." She looked at Grant and Blythe beneath the flowers. "I do not envy her." Dominic's thumb moved once against her hand. That was all. When the ceremony ended, guests stood. Applause rose like rainfall. Grant kissed Blythe, and the quartet swelled as if music could make the moment holy. The newly married couple turned and walked back down the aisle. As Grant passed Avery's row, his eyes met hers. This time, he did not look away quickly. He saw her sitting tall. He saw Dominic's hand around hers. He saw no tears, no pleading, no proof that he had ruined her. Something tightened in his face. Avery gave him a small, calm smile. Then he was past her. Dominic stood and offered his arm. She took it. The reception was held beneath the largest tent, though tent was too humble a word for a structure with crystal chandeliers, hardwood flooring, white roses, and a small orchestra tucked near the far side. Waiters moved with trays of champagne. Politicians laughed with donors. Women kissed cheeks without touching skin. Men clasped shoulders and measured usefulness in a glance. Avery knew this world. She had stood in its corners, carried its purses, smiled when Marjorie gave instructions disguised as suggestions. Today, people stepped aside to let her pass. That was the first time she almost cried. Not because they respected her, because she realized how much of respect was theater, and how many years she had been denied even the costume. Dominic bent his head. "Too much, no. You are lying." "Yes. Do you want to leave?" Avery looked across the tent. Grant stood near Blythe, accepting congratulations. Marjorie whispered to a woman in silver. Several guests watched Avery openly now. "No," she said. "I want a drink." Dominic's eyes warmed. "There she is." They accepted champagne from a passing waiter. Avery took a sip and nearly coughed. Dominic watched her. Expensive tastes like nervous fruit. Accurate. At their assigned table, Avery found herself seated with a retired judge, a real estate developer, a senator's wife, and a woman who introduced herself as Grant's godmother, but looked at Avery as if she had discovered an interesting stain. So the godmother said, after the salad course arrived, "Avery Monroe, I must say you look transformed." Avery lifted her glass. "How kind of you to notice." The woman smiled. "I only mean you seem very different from when we last saw you." "I am?" The table went quiet. The godmother waited for more. Avery gave her nothing. Dominic's knee brushed hers beneath the table. Approval without applause. The senator's wife turned to Dominic. "And how did you two meet?" "Through shared interests," Dominic said. The woman laughed lightly. "That sounds mysterious." It was. Avery took another sip of champagne to hide her smile. The judge studied Dominic with careful eyes. "Vale, are you in shipping?" Dominic looked at him. "Among other things." The judge did not ask about the other things. Dinner passed in courses Avery barely tasted. Every few minutes someone glanced from another table. Whispers moved and dissolved. Dominic remained perfectly at ease, as if being watched were simply another form of weather. Avery found she was not pretending as much as she expected. She was nervous. Yes, but she was also awake. Painfully, vividly awake. Then the music changed. The first dance began. Grant and Blythe moved to the center of the floor. They danced beautifully. Of course they did. Every step looked practiced. Every turn approved by someone with a clipboard and a family reputation to protect. When guests joined them, Dominic stood. Avery looked up. No. Yes, we did not practice this enough. We practiced. In your living room. Now we improve the scenery. He held out his hand. Refusing would draw more attention than accepting. Avery knew that. Dominic knew she knew. She placed her hand in his. The dance floor opened around them. Dominic guided her into the music with controlled ease. His hand settled at her waist. Hers rested against his shoulder. The fabric of his suit was warm beneath her palm. Avery focused on the steps. Dominic focused on her. You are counting, he said. I do not want to step on you. I have survived worse. That is not comforting. You are doing fine. She looked up sharply. Fine. His eyes held hers. Beautifully. Her breath caught. The word was too simple to defend against. They moved through the music and the room blurred at the edges. For the first time all day, Avery forgot to wonder who was watching. Dominic's hand at her waist became less like a prop and more like a promise neither of them had agreed to say aloud. Across the floor, Grant danced with Blythe. His eyes found Avery over his bride's shoulder. Avery saw the question there. Not love, not regret exactly. Possession confused by absence. He had expected her pain to remain where he left it. It had moved on without asking him. Dominic's voice brushed near her ear. He is watching. I know. How does it feel? Avery considered lying. Then she looked at Grant. Really looked, and felt nothing break. It feels like I survived a man I mistook for a future. Dominic's hand tightened at her waist. Good. After 2 songs, Avery needed air. Dominic looked reluctant, but let her go when she promised she was only stepping onto the terrace. The evening had cooled. Lanterns glowed along the garden path. Beyond the hedges, the lake was a dark sheet beneath the sky. Avery stood alone for less than a minute. Avery. She closed her eyes. Of course. Grant stood near the terrace doors, champagne in hand, expression carefully concerned. You came, he said. You invited me. I was not sure you would. I know. He looked toward the tent, then back at her. You look different. So you said with your face during the ceremony. His mouth tightened. That is not fair. No, it is accurate. I only meant this does not seem like you. Avery turned fully toward him. Which part? The dress? Dominic? Or the fact that I am not standing here bleeding where you left me? Grant's expression shifted. The concern thinned, revealing irritation beneath. You do not have to prove anything to me? Avery smiled. How strange. I do not remember asking what I had to do for you. Grant stepped closer. Dominic Vale is dangerous. So are men who make women feel small and call it protection. You do not know what you are getting involved in. No, Avery said. But for once I chose it myself. His hand reached for her arm. He barely touched her. Dominic's voice cut through the terrace. Remove your hand. Grant froze. Dominic stood in the doorway, black suit, dark eyes, all the warmth gone from his face. The garden seemed to hold its breath. Grant released Avery at once, though he tried to make it look voluntary. We were talking. You were finished. Grant glanced toward the tent where a few guests had begun to notice. Public humiliation was the only language men like him truly feared. Avery lifted her hand slightly, stopping Dominic before he came closer. Then she looked at Grant. You told me I was not built for your life. His face changed. Avery, you were right. I had to become smaller to fit inside it. The words came calmly. That made them stronger. I am grateful now, not because you hurt me, because you made me see how much of myself I had already given away before you left. Grant looked wounded. Avery no longer felt responsible for tending it. I hope Blythe gets more honesty from you than I did. She walked past him and joined Dominic at the terrace doors. Dominic offered his hand. This time she took it without thinking. They crossed the reception together, moving through chandeliers, music whispers, and faces too polished to show surprise properly. Caleb appeared near the exit with Dominic's coat already in hand. Outside, the night air hit Avery's skin. She did not realize she was shaking until Dominic wrapped his coat around her shoulders. In the car, she looked back at the glowing estate. The wedding continued without her. Music, speeches, champagne, laughter. The life she had almost entered kept shining in the distance. It no longer looked like a dream. It looked like a beautiful house with locked doors. Dominic sat beside her in silence for several minutes. Then he asked, Do you still love him? Avery watched the estate shrink through the rear window. No. Dominic looked at her. She looked back. I think I loved who I became while trying to earn him. That is the part I am grieving. Dominic's face softened for one unguarded second. Then his phone rang. The sound sliced through the quiet. He looked at the screen. Whatever he saw erased every trace of softness. He answered. Avery could not understand the voice on the other end, but she watched Dominic's jaw harden, watched his gaze move from her to the dark road behind them. When he spoke, his voice lowered. Find Caleb. Lock down the club. No one moves without my permission. Avery's fingers tightened around the edge of his coat. Dominic ended the call and turned the phone over in his hand. The car kept moving through the night. What happened? Avery asked. Dominic looked at her. For the first time since she had met him, she saw something in his eyes that looked almost like fear. The Whitakers were not the only people watching us tonight. The words stayed in the car long after Dominic said them. Avery looked from his face to the dark road behind them where headlights drifted in and out of the rear window like distant eyes. A few hours ago, she had been standing beneath chandeliers, learning that her heart could survive watching Grant Whitaker marry another woman. Now Dominic's coat was wrapped around her shoulders. His phone was silent in his hand, and every shadow outside the glass felt like it had a name. What does that mean? She asked. Dominic did not answer quickly. That frightened her more than if he had lied. The driver kept both hands on the wheel. The city lights grew closer. Beside Avery, Dominic sat perfectly still, but something in him had changed. His attention was no longer on her, not fully. It had spread outward, filling the car, the street, the dark spaces between buildings. He looked like a man listening to threats no one else could hear. Dominic. His eyes moved to hers. For 1 second, she saw the man from the dance floor, the one who had told her she was doing beautifully, the one whose hand had rested at her waist like it belonged there. Then the wall came down. It means you are going home. The sentence landed cold. Avery blinked. What? When we reach the city, Caleb will take you back to your apartment. You said we were going to the penthouse. I changed my mind. Because of that call. Yes. Then tell me what happened. No. The word was flat and final. Avery stared at him, waiting for the explanation that did not come. The car entered New Orleans again, passing beneath strips of amber streetlight. Dominic's face appeared and vanished in the rhythm of the city, hard, shadowed, unreadable. You do not get to do that, Avery said. His gaze cut to hers. I do. No, you do not get to put your coat on my shoulders. Hold my hand through the worst day of my life. Tell me people were watching us. Then drop me at my apartment like a returned package. His jaw tightened. I told you from the beginning this was temporary. You told me a lot of things. And you heard what you wanted. The cruelty was precise. It did not sound accidental. Avery felt it strike, then spread. For a moment she was back at that restaurant with Grant listening to a man soften his voice around a blade. She pulled Dominic's coat off her shoulders and placed it between them on the leather seat. Dominic looked at it. Something moved in his face. Not regret. Not enough. The car stopped in front of her building. Lena's bakery was dark now, its striped awning snapping softly in the night wind. The upstairs kitchen light still glowed in Avery's window, a small square of yellow above the closed shop. Caleb opened the door. Avery did not move. She looked at Dominic. Say it honestly. His eyes were dark. Say what? That you are sending me away because the job is done. Not because you are scared. The silence changed shape. Caleb looked toward the street, suddenly very interested in nothing. Dominic leaned closer, his voice low enough for only her to hear. I am not a safe man to stand beside. I know. No, he said. You like the idea of knowing. That is not the same. Avery swallowed, but she did not look away. You think I do not understand danger because I spent my life filing court documents and smiling at people who forgot my name. Dominic's face hardened. That is not what I think. Then stop treating me like a child. He looked at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was ice. You were useful tonight. Grant saw you. Marjorie saw you. Everyone saw you. The arrangement is over. Useful. The word hit deeper than he could have known. Or maybe he knew exactly where to aim. Avery nodded once, slowly. Congratulations, she said. You finally sound like them. Then she stepped out of the car. The door closed behind her with a soft click that felt like something being buried. She did not look back. Avery climbed the stairs to her apartment with her dress lifted in one hand and her shoes in the other. The hallway smelled like flour, old wood, and rainwater tracked across the floor. Her hands shook so badly it took 3 tries to unlock the door. Inside, everything looked too small. The sink with 1 mug in it, the dying basil plant on the windowsill, the cardboard box with Grant's things still waiting by the bedroom, the legal folders on the table, a life she had outgrown before she had known she was allowed to. She unfastened her mother's pendant with careful fingers and set it on the kitchen counter. Then she stood there in the emerald dress while the city hummed outside, and for the first time all night she cried. Not for Grant. Not even for Dominic. She cried because for 1 shining hour she had felt like the room could not decide her worth. Then Dominic, with 1 cold sentence, had reminded her how quickly men reached for control when feeling became inconvenient. Her phone buzzed. Maggie, you home? Avery stared at the screen. Yes. Are you okay? Avery almost typed yes. Then she deleted it. No. Maggie called immediately. Avery answered and sat on the kitchen floor because her legs had stopped pretending they were strong. What happened? Maggie asked. Avery looked at the box of Grant's things across the room. I think I survived the wedding. That sounds good. It was. And Avery closed her eyes. Then I remembered survival is not the same as being safe. Maggie went quiet. The next morning came in pale and damp. Avery woke on the sofa with the emerald dress folded over a chair and a blanket tangled around her legs. Her head hurt. Her mouth tasted like champagne and regret. There was no message from Dominic, no car outside, no command at 8 o'clock. The absence felt deliberate. She hated that she noticed. By noon, Avery had changed into jeans and an old sweater. She made coffee too weak to matter, stared at the unread emails from Bellamy and Price, and deleted another voicemail from her boss after the words dramatic and irresponsible came through. Her phone rang from an unknown number. Avery almost ignored it. Then something in her chest tightened. She answered. "Hello." Caleb's voice came through, calm and low. "Step away from the window." Avery froze. "Caleb." "Now." She moved before she asked why, backing away from the kitchen window until her shoulder touched the wall. "What is happening?" "There is a black sedan parked across the street from your building. It has been there for 26 minutes. Her pulse sharpened. "Is it yours?" "No." She looked toward the blinds. "Who are they?" "Victor Rourke's people." The name meant nothing to her, and somehow that made it worse. Who is Victor Rourke? A man Dominic spent 5 years keeping out of New Orleans. Avery pressed her hand against the wall. "Why would he care about me?" A pause. When Caleb answered, his voice had changed by a fraction. "Because last night you walked into a political wedding on Dominic Vale's arm. In our world, that says something. What does it say that you matter?" The words did not feel romantic. They felt like a target being painted on her back. Avery closed her eyes. "Does Dominic know?" "He knows. And he sent you to call me instead of calling himself." Caleb said nothing. That was answer enough. Anger rose clean and hot. It cut through the fear better than comfort could have. Avery walked to the bedroom and grabbed the flat shoes she wore to work. Miss Monroe, Caleb said as if he heard movement through the phone. "I am going to the club." "No, you are not." Then Dominic should have told me the truth when he had the chance. Avery. The use of her first name stopped her for half a second. Only half. If there are men outside my apartment because of him, I am not going to sit here and wait for someone to decide what I am allowed to know. She hung up. Getting out of the building was easier than it should have been. Avery left through the bakery entrance after Lena's nephew opened the back door for a flower delivery. She kept her head down, crossed through the alley, and caught a cab 2 blocks over. Her hands shook the entire ride, but she did not go home. The St. Nocturne looked different in daylight. Less like a myth, more like a crime pretending to be architecture. The black door was closed. The same men stood outside, though they looked less bored when Avery stepped out of the cab. One of them reached for his earpiece. Avery did not slow down. "I know," she said. "He dislikes surprises." The door opened before she touched it. Inside, the club was empty. The chairs turned up on tables, the stage dark, the smell of last night's whiskey hiding beneath lemon polish. Caleb met her near the bar. "You should not be here. I have been told that in better rooms." His mouth tightened. "He is already angry." "Good. That gives us something in common." Caleb led her through the hallway to Dominic's office. The door was open. Dominic stood at the center of the room with 2 men Avery did not know, and a woman with cropped black hair, broad shoulders, and eyes so steady they made violence seem like a profession. A large map of the city covered Dominic's desk. Photographs lay across it. When Dominic saw Avery, the room went still. His voice was very soft. "Leave us." No one moved for a breath. Then the 2 men left. The woman did not. Dominic looked at her. "Mara." "I am staying," she said. Avery liked her immediately. Dominic's eyes returned to Avery. "You were told to stay home." "No. I was warned. There is a difference." He took 1 step toward her. "You put yourself in danger." "I woke up in danger. I just decided not to be ignorant in it." His face tightened. Avery looked at the desk. One photograph sat apart from the rest. Her building, her window, her leaving the bakery in jeans and an old sweater. At the bottom of the photograph, written in black marker, were 2 words. Pretty choice. Cold moved through her so fast she almost swayed. Dominic noticed and started toward her. She lifted one hand. He stopped. Not because he wanted to. Because she had asked without speaking, and he had finally listened. "Who is Victor Rourke?" she asked. The woman named Mara answered. "Old money without the manners. River business. Judges, cops, men who disappear and records that get corrected." Dominic's gaze did not leave Avery. He used to control the West Bank docks. Used to, I removed him. Mara gave a humorless smile. "That is one way to describe it." Dominic's eyes cut to her. She did not look away. Caleb came in behind Avery and closed the door. Dominic said Rourke has been trying to come back for 18 months. He needs political cover. The Whitakers have debts, and the Caldwells have influence. Avery stared at the photograph. And last night gave him a story. No one answered. She looked up. Dominic Vale at a Whitaker wedding. Me on his arm. Grant staring like an idiot. Everyone whispering. Dominic's jaw worked once. "I should not have taken you there." Avery laughed softly without humor. "That is your conclusion. It is the truth." "No. It is guilt wearing a suit." Mara's eyebrows lifted. Caleb looked down. Dominic took another step toward Avery, slower this time. "You do not understand what men like Rourke do to leverage." "I understand leverage," Avery said. "I worked for attorneys who smiled while destroying families on paper. This is not paper. No, this is my life, which means I get to be in the conversation." The office went quiet. Dominic looked at her like she had crossed a line he could not decide whether to punish or admire. Avery pointed at the photograph. "He knows where I live. He knows what I look like. He knows I matter to you, or he thinks I do. So tell me what happens now." Dominic turned away. That frightened her. Not because he dismissed her. Because the movement looked like restraint. "We move you." "Where?" "A safe house." "For how long?" "As long as necessary." "And what am I supposed to do there?" "Stay alive." Avery stepped closer to the desk. "I am not a vase you move away from a window before a storm." Dominic turned back. "No. You are a woman who became a target because of me. I became a target because powerful men keep making deals around women and calling it protection." That landed. She saw it. Mara leaned against the wall, arms folded. Teach her enough to survive 1 second. Dominic's eyes snapped to her. "No. 1 second is sometimes all a person needs." "No." Avery looked at him. "You taught me how to survive a room full of social predators. Teach me how to survive yours." Dominic's expression changed, but he did not answer. Mara pushed off the wall. "She is right. I did not ask. You hired me because I say useful things when everyone else is scared of your temper." Dominic's mouth flattened. Avery almost smiled. Almost. Mara walked to Avery and studied her with calm assessment. "Ever thrown a punch?" "No." "Good. Most people do it wrong and fall over their own confidence." Dominic said, "This is not happening." Avery did not look at him. "What do I do first?" Mara smiled. Not kindly. "Take off your shoes." They trained in the basement beneath the St. Nocturne in a room with concrete floors, padded walls, and lights too bright to flatter anyone. Avery learned that fear lived in the body first. It tightened the throat, locked the knees, made fingers stupid. Mara taught her how to break a wrist grip by moving toward the thumb, how to drop her weight instead of pulling back, how to turn panic into motion, how to look for exits without turning her head like prey, how to use keys, elbows, knees, and the sharp edge of a table. Avery failed. Again, again, again. Her shoulder hit the mat. Her wrist burned. Her pride bruised worse than her body. Mara offered no comfort. Panic is not the enemy, she said. Freezing is. Avery pushed herself up, breathing hard. Dominic stood behind the glass wall watching. That made everything worse. On the sixth fall, Avery slapped the mat with her palm. Stop looking at me like I am already dead. Dominic entered the room. Mara stepped back. Avery stood, hair loose around her face, skin damp with sweat. Dominic's voice was low. That is exactly what I am trying to prevent. No, Avery said. You are trying to prevent yourself from feeling guilty. The words hit the room like a dropped glass. Mara moved toward the door. Dominic did not look away from Avery. You think this is about guilt? I think you do not know the difference between protecting someone and owning the decision. The silence after that was dangerous, not loud, not sharp, quiet enough to cut clean. Dominic stepped closer. When I was 15, he said my father put a gun in my hand and told me the first person I failed to protect would teach me more than any enemy. He was right. Avery's anger softened before she could stop it. Dominic saw that and hated it. My mother died because I believed a locked door was enough. My brother tried to kill me because I believed blood meant loyalty. Every mistake I made came with a body. His voice dropped. So forgive me if I do not treat your life as an experiment in independence. Avery's throat tightened. I am sorry about your mother. His face closed. But I am not her. He went still. Avery stepped closer, trembling now, but not from fear. And if you care about me, you do not get to turn my fear into another cage. Dominic looked at her for a long time. Then he turned to Mara. Again. Avery blinked. Mara smiled. That sounded like permission. It sounded like a warning, Caleb said from the doorway. Avery wiped sweat from her forehead. For who Caleb looked at Dominic, then at her. Everyone. By evening, the safe house was ready. Avery was not. Dominic insisted she leave the club before dark. He did not apologize for the order. He did not call it an order either. That was progress, small and rough, but real. Mara drove. 2 guards followed in a second car. The safe house stood in Bywater behind tall hedges and a plain brick front. Nothing about it looked important. That Mara said was the point. Inside, the rooms were clean, quiet, and too empty. A sofa, a table, covered windows, a kitchen with bottled water stacked on the counter. No photographs, no personal touches, safety without comfort. Mara checked every room before letting Avery step beyond the entry. 1 guard stayed near the front window. Another walked the back hall. Avery noticed the younger guard checking his phone too often. Mara noticed too. Their eyes met. Avery's pulse changed. What the guard asked. Before Mara could answer, the front window exploded. The sound ripped the room open. Glass burst inward. Gunfire tore through the walls. Mara shoved Avery down so hard her shoulder slammed into the floor. Kitchen, Mara shouted. Now! Avery crawled, then ran. The world became fragments. A lamp falling. A guard screaming. Mara firing from behind the sofa. The back door splintering. A man rushed through the kitchen entrance and grabbed Avery's arm. His fingers clamped around her wrist. For 1 frozen second, everything vanished. Then Mara's voice returned inside her head, toward the thumb. Drop weight. Move. Avery turned into the grip instead of away from it. The man cursed as her elbow drove into his ribs. His hand loosened. 1 second. She broke free. Another man caught her in the alley. She kicked back, connected with his shin, heard him swear. Then something hard struck the side of her head. Light burst behind her eyes. The last thing she saw was Mara in the doorway, blood on her cheek fighting to reach her. Then the world went black. When Avery woke, she was in the back of a van. Her wrists were bound. Her head throbbed. Every breath tasted like metal and gasoline. 2 men sat across from her. One had a swollen lip. The other smiled like a man who wanted credit for being patient. "You are quieter than I expected," he said. Avery blinked slowly. Fear rose. She let it rise. She did not build a home for it. She looked at the doors, the locks, the man's knife, the way the van turned left, then right, then slowed over broken pavement. She listened. Water, distant traffic, a horn from the river. The smiling man leaned forward. "You know who is waiting for you." Avery's mouth was dry. She thought of Dominic saying, "Look at me." She thought of her mother saying, "Don't help them." She lifted her chin. "Someone insecure enough to send other men to grab me." The smile disappeared. Good. The van stopped. The rear doors opened. Cold river air rushed in. Ahead, under a broken yellow light, stood a rusted warehouse near the industrial canal. One of the men grabbed Avery by the arm and dragged her out. Her legs nearly failed. She made them hold. The warehouse doors opened with a long metal groan. Inside, shadows waited. And somewhere in the dark, a man began to clap slowly. "Miss Monroe," a smooth voice said. "Dominic Vale has excellent taste in trouble." Avery raised her eyes. Victor Rourke stepped into the light. He was not what Avery expected. Men like him were supposed to look monstrous, larger than life, scarred, brutal, obvious. Victor Rourke looked like a man who might help an old woman with her chair at a charity dinner, then buy the building she lived in and raise her rent before dessert. His suit was dark gray. His shoes were polished. His silver hair was combed neatly back from a face too smooth for the violence in his eyes. He smiled at Avery as if they had been introduced at the right table. "Miss Monroe," he said, "you caused quite a stir last night." Avery's wrists burned where the plastic ties cut into her skin. Her head throbbed from the blow in the alley. The warehouse smelled of rust, river water oil, and old rain. Somewhere above, loose metal creaked in the wind. 2 men held her arms. She made herself stand straight. Dominic had made her walk across his penthouse until her body remembered how not to fold. Mara had made her hit the mat until pain stopped sounding like a command. Avery lifted her chin. "I hear that happens when people are interesting." Rourke laughed softly, not amused, approving. "I see why he likes you. He has good taste." Does he? Rourke stepped closer. Dominic Vale used to have discipline. He knew what to want. He knew what to bury. Then he walks into a Whitaker wedding with a woman who looks at him like he might still be human. Avery said nothing. Rourke's eyes moved to her pendant. "Family." Avery's throat tightened, but her voice did not shake. "Something you would not understand." The smile faded by one careful degree. The man on Avery's left tightened his grip. Rourke raised one hand and the grip loosened. "Do not bruise her more than necessary," he said. "I need Dominic thinking clearly enough to suffer." Avery's stomach turned cold. "You want him here?" "Of course." "Then why take me?" "Because kings do not leave their castles for insults." Rourke leaned closer. "They leave for what they cannot replace." Avery hated the warmth that moved through her chest. She hated that even here, bound and bleeding under a warehouse light, some part of her wanted that to be true. Rourke noticed. His eyes sharpened. "There it is." Avery forced herself still. "What?" "That foolish little hope." He touched the air near her face, not her skin. "Women have built entire prisons from less." The warehouse doors groaned behind him. Every head turned. A black car rolled slowly inside headlights, cutting through dust and fog. It stopped 20 feet away. The engine died. For one moment, there was only the sound of river wind moving through broken windows. Then Dominic Vale stepped out. He wore the same black suit from the wedding. The tie was gone. His shirt collar was open. There was blood on one cuff, though Avery did not know whose. Caleb stepped out behind him. 2 of Dominic's men followed. Not enough. Rourke had at least 10. Avery saw the numbers settle in Dominic's eyes. She saw him read exits, weapons distance, weak hands, nervous men. His gaze touched everything before it came to her. When it did, the air changed. His eyes moved over the bruise at her temple, the cut on her lip, her bound wrists. The man from the club disappeared. The man underneath looked ready to burn the river. Avery shook her head once. Small. No. Dominic saw it. His jaw tightened. Rourke clapped slowly. Beautiful. Truly. I always wondered what would make Dominic Vale come when called. Now I know she wears emerald. Dominic's voice was quiet. Let her go. Rourke smiled. That is not how negotiations begin. This is not a negotiation. No, it is a reminder. Rourke turned slightly, letting Dominic see Avery more clearly. You pushed me out of my city. You took docks that belonged to my family before you were born. You bought judges I had already bought. You made men afraid to say my name in rooms where they used to drink my whiskey. Dominic did not move. You killed children, he said. Rourke's smile thinned. A family made an unfortunate choice. They refused to sell. They refused to understand. Avery watched Dominic's hands. Still. Too still. Caleb stood beside him, eyes moving across the rafters. Rourke stepped behind Avery. Something cold pressed against her ribs. A gun. Dominic's eyes dropped to it. Every man in the warehouse seemed to breathe at once. Rourke's voice softened. Put your weapon down. Caleb shifted. Dominic did not look at him. Avery's heart slammed against her ribs. Dominic, she said. His eyes found hers. In them she saw apology and trust. That frightened her more than fury. Slowly, Dominic drew his gun and lowered it to the concrete. The sound of metal touching the floor echoed through the warehouse. Caleb's voice cut low. Dom. Dominic did not answer. Rourke smiled wider. There he is. Not the ghost. Not the Prince of New Orleans. Just a man with something soft enough to split open. Avery let her breath come slowly. Mara's voice lived somewhere in her bones. Fear is information, not instruction. The man on her right held her elbow. His thumb rested carelessly near the inside of her arm. His stance was too wide. His attention was on Dominic, not her. Rourke's gun pressed into her ribs, but his other hand held the back of her bound wrists. Plastic tie. Tight, but not impossible. Dominic's eyes flicked once. Not to her face, to her hands. Avery understood. He had not surrendered because he thought she was helpless. He had bought her 1 second. Rourke leaned closer to Dominic. You should have killed me years ago. Yes, Dominic said. Now she pays for your mercy. No, Avery said. Rourke's head turned. Avery let her knees weaken. The man holding her cursed and tightened his grip, adjusting to keep her upright. His thumb moved. 1 second. Avery dropped her weight and twisted toward the thumb instead of away from it. His grip broke. Pain shot up her arm, bright and sharp. She drove her bound hands down hard against the knife at his belt, catching the handle badly, cutting her palm. But the blade came free. Rourke grabbed for her. She turned into him instead of back. The gun fired. The shot went wild into the rafters. Dominic moved, The warehouse erupted. Caleb fired first, clean and fast. One of Rourke's men dropped behind a stack of crates. Dominic closed the distance like something unleashed, slamming into the man between him and Avery before the man could raise his weapon. Avery hit the concrete behind a rusted machine. Her wrists screamed as she sawed the knife against the plastic tie. Once, twice. The blade slipped and bit her skin. She clenched her teeth and cut again. The tie snapped. Her hands came free. Gunfire cracked across the warehouse. Dust fell from the ceiling. Men shouted. Someone screamed. The air filled with smoke and metal. Avery crawled toward a row of pallets, keeping low. A man grabbed her ankle. She kicked back, heel connecting with his mouth. He swore and pulled harder. She reached for anything. Her fingers closed around a short metal pipe. She twisted and swung. The pipe struck his wrist. He let go. She scrambled backward, breath tearing through her chest. Across the room, Dominic fought like every part of him had been built for this and hated itself for knowing how. Efficient, brutal, terrifying. He took a hit to the jaw and answered with an elbow that folded a man to the floor. Rourke moved through the chaos toward a side door. Avery saw him before Dominic did. She pushed herself up. Dominic Rourke turned and fired. Dominic threw himself behind a concrete pillar. Caleb fired back, forcing Rourke behind a stack of oil drums. A side door burst open. Mara came in bleeding from the cheek gun, raised eyes clear. Avery nearly sobbed with relief. Mara saw her. Down. Avery dropped as Mara shot the man coming up behind her. Rourke cursed and grabbed Avery by the hair as she tried to crawl away. Pain burned across her scalp. He yanked her against him, one arm around her throat, gun at her temple. The warehouse froze in pieces. Dominic stepped out from behind the pillar. Blood ran from the corner of his mouth. His eyes locked on Avery. Rourke's breathing was rough against her ear. Enough, he said. Drop everything. Dominic's hand opened. Caleb lowered his weapon by a fraction. Mara did not. Rourke pressed the gun harder to Avery's temple. I said, drop it. Avery could barely breathe. His arm crushed her windpipe. Spots moved at the edges of her vision. Dominic's voice was low. Look at me, Avery. She did. His face was not calm. Not really. But his eyes held hers like a line across deep water. Breathe. Rourke laughed, touching. Avery's right hand still held the metal pipe hidden against her skirt. Rourke's weight was wrong. His grip was high. His ribs were exposed where his jacket had opened. Mara's lesson came back. Do not pull at the hand around your throat if you cannot break it. Make him need that hand somewhere else. Avery stopped fighting. Her body went heavy. Rourke adjusted just slightly to keep her upright. She slammed the pipe backward into his ribs. Rourke grunted. His arm loosened. Avery dropped. Dominic fired from Caleb's lowered gun before it even seemed to reach his hand. The shot struck Rourke's shoulder. The gun at Avery's head clattered to the floor. Dominic crossed the space and drove Rourke into the concrete. The sound was sickening. Rourke laughed through blood. There you are, he rasped. Do it. Prove she did not tame you. Dominic pinned him by the throat. His hand tightened. The warehouse seemed to hold its breath. Avery rose unsteadily. Every part of her hurt. Blood slid down her palm. Her throat burned where Rourke had held her. She saw Dominic's face. Not rage. Memory. A boy with a gun in his hand. A father teaching violence as inheritance. A mother behind a locked door that had not been enough. A brother with a blade and ambition where love should have been. Rourke smiled up at him. Kill me, Vale. Dominic's hand tightened. Avery stepped closer. Dominic. He did not look at her. She took another step. Dominic. His shoulders moved with one hard breath. She did not plead. She did not beg him to be better. She had no interest in becoming another woman whose safety depended on the shape of a man's restraint. She simply said, "Choose what happens next." Dominic closed his eyes. For one terrible second, nothing moved. Then his hand opened. He stood and stepped back. "Alive," he said. Caleb stared at him. Dominic wiped blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. "We take him alive." Rourke's smile vanished. That was when Avery understood. Death would have made him a legend in the alleys a ghost men could drink to. A warning passed through back rooms. Alive, he could talk. Alive, he could be traded. Alive, he could become evidence. Mara crossed the floor and kicked Rourke's gun away. Caleb dragged Rourke up and cuffed him with plastic ties. Rourke looked at Avery, hatred clean in his eyes. "This is not over." Avery met his stare. "It is for tonight." Outside, rain began to fall. Not heavy, not dramatic, just a soft Louisiana rain tapping against broken metal, washing blood into thin red lines across the concrete. Dominic approached Avery slowly. For once, he did not touch her first. "Avery." She looked at him. His face was bruised. His shirt was torn. Blood marked his collar. He looked less like a myth than any moment since she had met him. He looked human. That was more dangerous. "Are you hurt?" "Yes." His face tightened. "Badly, I do not know yet." He swallowed. "I am sorry." The words were rough, bare. Avery looked down at her hands, then back at him. For which part? He flinched. "Good. All of it needed light. For sending you away," he said. "For deciding silence was protection. For giving you enough truth to keep you close and enough distance to keep myself comfortable." Avery's throat ached. The rain grew louder. Dominic looked at her like every answer mattered. "I love you." The words did not arrive beautifully. No candles, no music, no polished ballroom, just smoke, blood, rain, and a dangerous man finally saying something without control wrapped around it. Avery's eyes burned. Dominic took a breath. "I sent you away because I thought distance was mercy. I was wrong. I kept things from you because I thought knowledge would make you afraid. I was wrong. I tried to protect you by making choices for you." His voice broke at the edge. "I was wrong." Avery had cried enough for men who called their fear care. She did not cry now, and now Dominic's eyes held hers. "Now I ask. I do not order. I tell the truth, even when it costs me. I make room for you to leave, even if it ruins me." The answer moved through her slowly. Not as a cure, as a door opening. She thought of Grant at the restaurant explaining her future like it had been voted on without her. She thought of Marjorie's smile, the invitation, the empty space beside her name. She had wanted one night of borrowed power. Somewhere along the way, she had found her own. "I love you too," Avery said. Dominic closed his eyes. Relief passed across his face so nakedly that she had to look away for a second. Then she stepped closer. "But I will not belong to you like property. No. I will not live in a beautiful cage. No. I will not be kept ignorant because truth is ugly. No. And I will not be the only one who changes." Dominic nodded. No clever answer. No seduction. Only promise. "Then I change." Mara cleared her throat from across the room. "I hate to interrupt a bloody confession, but we need to move before every crooked badge in the parish gets curious." Caleb looked at Avery's bleeding hand. "She needs a doctor." Dominic's eyes moved to the cut, then to her face. "May I?" The question was small. It changed everything. Avery nodded. He took her hand carefully, as if gentleness had become a language he was learning late and badly, but with full attention. By dawn, Victor Rourke was no longer a ghost story. He was a file. Then a confession. Then a chain of names whispered into federal ears by men who suddenly discovered loyalty had limits. Dominic did not deliver him to justice because he had become good overnight. Avery would have hated that lie. Dominic delivered him because death was too easy, and because the city had lived too long with powerful men turning women, families, and debts into pieces on a board. Within 48 hours, riverfront properties were raided. 2 judges resigned. A police captain disappeared, then returned with 3 lawyers and a face the color of old paper. Senator Whitaker announced a temporary leave for health reasons. Everyone in New Orleans understood health had nothing to do with it. Grant called once. Avery watched his name light up her phone while sitting in Dominic's kitchen with her bandaged hand around a mug of coffee Mrs. Wynne had made strong enough to count as a weapon. She let it ring. Then she blocked him. Mrs. Wynne set a plate of toast in front of her. "Good," she said. Avery looked up. The toast. The blocking. Avery smiled for the first time since the warehouse. Dominic was not there. He had been downstairs for hours with Caleb lawyers and men who spoke in low voices. Once that would have made Avery restless with suspicion. Now every hour he sent her the truth. Not pretty truth, not cleaned-up truth. Names, risks, choices. Sometimes she hated what she read. Sometimes she hated that she had asked. But every message ended the same way. "Tell me what you think." The first time he sent it, Avery stared at the words until her vision blurred. Not because they were romantic, because they were respect-wearing plain clothes. 3 months later, Avery resigned from Bellamy and Price. Her boss called her irresponsible. She smiled, signed the last form, and left his office without explaining herself into something smaller. The new office was on the 2nd floor of an old building with peeling paint, bad plumbing, and a printer that jammed every time it sensed urgency. The organization helped women leave violent marriages, coercive families, financial traps, and men who used protection, like a lock. The coffee was terrible. The pay was worse. But people knew Avery's name. More importantly, Avery knew herself inside the work. One afternoon, a young woman sat across from her, hands clenched around a tissue until it tore. "I do not know how to leave," the woman whispered. Avery thought of rain on French Quarter pavement. Cream paper, gold lettering, Dominic's black door. The first time she walked into a room without asking the floor for permission. "You do not have to know all of it today," Avery said. The woman looked up. Avery smiled gently. "Just the first door." That evening, Dominic waited outside the building. Not in front of the door. Across the street, leaning against a black car, giving her space to decide whether she wanted to cross. Avery did. He opened the passenger door, then stopped himself. She noticed. He noticed her noticing. "Too much?" he asked. "No," Avery said. "Better." His mouth curved. Mrs. Wynne would have called that progress. Maggie called it suspicious, but promising. 1 year after the wedding, Dominic took Avery back to the St. Nocturne after closing. The club was empty. No jazz, no smoke, no men measuring threats in the corners. Only low amber light, polished wood, and the memory of rain. Avery stood near the entrance. "I was terrified that night," she said. "I know. I thought you might laugh at me. I almost did." She turned. "Excuse me." Dominic's eyes warmed. "Then you said Grant Whitaker's name, and I remembered there were men I disliked more than surprises. Very romantic. I was not romantic then." And now Dominic reached into his jacket. Avery's breath caught when she saw the velvet box. The same one. Her velvet box. The one that had held her mother's pendant the night she walked into his office, ready to trade a ghost for one evening of dignity. Dominic opened it. Inside was a ring. Simple. Beautiful. Not too large. Not too loud. Avery covered her mouth. Dominic lowered himself to one knee. In the room where half the city feared his name, the most dangerous man Avery had ever known knelt, like the floor was not beneath him, but chosen. "Avery Monroe," he said. Her eyes filled. "Come with me." A broken laugh escaped her. "Dominic. Not to a wedding, not for revenge, not because anyone is watching." His voice roughened. "Come home with me every day you choose to, and if one day you stop choosing it, I will open the door myself even if it kills me." Avery cried openly. She did not wipe the tears away. "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger with hands steadier than his voice. Avery looked down at it, then back at him. "I am keeping my last name. I assumed. And you are learning to make drinkable coffee. I own restaurants. You own intimidation with table service." Dominic laughed, real and low, filling the empty club like something finally allowed to live there. Years later, Avery stood at the window of a house outside New Orleans, holding their daughter against her shoulder. Lila slept with one tiny fist curled around Avery's mother's pendant. Dominic sat on the living room floor, trying to assemble a wooden toy with the seriousness of a man disarming a bomb. "She has your stubbornness," he said. "She is 8 months old. She made Caleb apologize to a stuffed alligator yesterday." Avery smiled. The alligator probably deserved it. Outside, New Orleans glowed in the distance. The city no longer felt like a place that had swallowed her voice. It was a place she had walked through, bled through, and chosen her way beyond. Dominic came to stand behind her. He did not touch her until she leaned back first. Then his arms came around her and their daughter. Warm, certain, chosen. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. Avery thought about the rain, the invitation, the wedding, the warehouse, the woman she used to be standing outside a black door with desperation in her hands. "Sometimes I regret the shoes." His mouth brushed her hair. "And me," Avery turned enough to look at him. "You were the dangerous part." "Were." She touched his face. The man beneath the myth. The home beneath the danger. "Now you are the part I chose." In her office, the old invitation rested inside a drawer. Not framed, not worshipped, just kept. A reminder in cream paper and gold lettering that there had once been an empty space beside her name. Avery Monroe, and guessed. She no longer saw the insult. She saw the beginning. Not of Dominic, not of revenge. Of the woman who walked through the door anyway.